Hello students, we are going to go through the geography review so you are ready for the test tomorrow. It will be on chapters 5 through 8, although you don't need your book or anything. There will be 12 multiple choice, 8 matching, 1 essay, and then 15 map questions on both the states and capitals and the provinces and territories and capitals. So be ready with understanding the map. Of course, you have to spell those correctly. So do some studying on that today. Know all of the landforms, and when I say have that map completed, I've decided to let you use that map of North America on your test. So that's a really good resource. If you have done a good job on your map and you can read what you have, on that front and back side map with all of those different landforms, I think there were 26 of them or something, you should be in pretty good shape for several of the questions. So like I said, know all the states and capitals as well as the provinces for those map questions. And then like the landform questions, when I said have your map completed, those will be in the form of like multiple choice questions. Okay, so if you can print this out, or if you want to just notate it on paper, I would recommend that you write it down. Psychology says when you write it down, you remember it better. So let's talk about the continental divide. It's the boundary that separates the continent's river systems, and it's the largest one runs along the Rockies. And what I want you to know is that there are several continental divides throughout the United States and Canada, but the largest we call the Great Continental Divide, and that goes just kind of almost parallel, if you will, with the Rocky Mountains. So everything to the east of the Continental Divide, rivers run to the east and south, and everything on the other side of the Continental Divide, rivers run to the west and south. Beringia. This is a land bridge that originally connected Siberia and Alaska before the tectonic plates separated, and that allowed nomadic hunters to migrate into the New World. So we're talking thousands and tens of thousands of years ago. There was once no real separation between Asia and North America. Some of the resources in North America. Now, this is going to be an important section right here, all this kind of whole section. So understand that this is where I'm going to get the essay question from, and I'll talk about that here in just a second. There are an abundance of resources, and what I want you to understand are these natural resources are so critical to the way our nation, as well as the continent, has formed. It has allowed both countries to develop very strong economies and stable governments. If you think back to those first 4 chapters, when we talked about size, shape, and like areas of countries, populations of countries, those are big factors to decide how countries operate. And because we have so many resources in the United States and Canada for that reason, it is allowed for really strong, stable governments. Part of that, at least for the purpose of North America, for the United States, was the purchase of the Louisiana Purchase. So in 1803, we purchased this area that we know as the Louisiana Purchase from France, because Jefferson believed that whoever controlled the western part of, at that time, the United States, or this area, the Louisiana Territory, controlled the economy. So Jefferson believed whoever controlled the West controlled the economy. It essentially doubled the size of the United States. So now we have, think about the 13 colonies, and now we're doubling that. But when we double that, we get all of the resources that come with it. So now we have a much greater size, and we can expand much further, and we have all the resources that are included in that, in probably most importantly, the Mississippi River. So let's first talk about the food that it allows, these resources in North America. Very fertile soil. Fertile soil allows the United States to produce more food than anywhere else. We have so many areas of great fertile soils, and maybe none more so than here in the Red River Valley. We have really good fertile soils, and that means we can produce a lot of food through America more than anywhere else in the world. We have a lot of timber. We have huge forests and very varied kinds of trees because of our wide climate zones. Because our country is so large, we have evergreen trees and palm trees all in the same country. Well, those timber resources are very good for building and ecosystems and everything that comes with the importance of timber. Water resources. These, to me, I'd maybe put a star by this one. I think this is probably the most impactful. Water resources allows for shipping, fishing, transportation, power, just natural water resources, because of all of the rivers and tributaries that are bound by oceans. Now, I remember when we talked about this, if we were a landlocked country, it would be very difficult for us to have any of access to shipping, fishing, transportation, power, water, things like that, because we don't have an ocean to get to one side or another. So this is a really big impact on both the way our government operates and our economy, for that matter. And then mineral resources. We have many fossil fuels and lots of mineral resources, which allow for rapid industrialization. When we discovered gold, when we figured out how to use coal, when we found other natural resources like iron ore, we realized we can build steel buildings. We can use these to convert into gasoline for gas-powered cars. And so we had access to a lot of mineral resources. Once again, partly because of the sheer size of one country, not just even one state, one country has allowed America and Canada to be very strong, stable countries. So through all this, we made the Transcontinental Railroad. That was built in the 1870s. So think about it. Jefferson purchased the Louisiana Purchase in 1803. And by 1870, we realized we want to connect. So it was built in the 1870s, and it connected the east and the western parts of the United States. The Union Pacific and the Union Rail Line and the Pacific Rail Lines met in Utah, and it connected the entire spans of the United States. Through all this, we've had to deal with urban sprawl. That's the rapid expansion of cities and towns, and it can contribute to push-pull factors as well as population growth rates. So what I want you to realize is urban sprawl is probably both good and bad. Urban sprawl said that we got big, huge cities. We had these almost mega cities on the East Coast. But because of the size of the United States, people could move further west, and they could settle in areas further and further away from these large cities. In fact, sometimes that's why people move away, because cities get too large and crowded and too densely populated, and they want to go to less populated areas. It's a big push-pull factor. The interstate road system, that was developed in the 1950s, and it connected the United States by roads. So it was a little less than 100 years earlier, the Transcontinental Railroad connected the United States by rail. Now we're connecting it by road systems, and that really helped tourism as well as interstate trade. It's that federal system project, meaning that the federal government supports most of the interstate road systems, although when we talk about federalism, we understand that there is a shared power between the state and the federal government. The Columbian Exchange. So you remember playing the game, right? So the Columbian Exchange is what we call, like, after Columbus's discovery, and I have discovery in quotations there because I definitely want you to remember that going back to Beringia, it's not like people didn't live here. It was just that Europeans hadn't really discovered what was here. But after his discovery, goods, people, and diseases were exchanged across the Atlantic. Here's probably the thing that you need to remember mostly. It changed how the world interacted, and it altered the history of the world. Columbus did maybe by some secondhand horrible things, like the diseases that were brought over, especially smallpox, were devastating. But the entire Columbian exchange system it changed the history of the world for good and for bad. The worst of it had to have been the transatlantic slave system, but it's not like Columbus necessarily started this system of slavery. Slavery has been going on forever, but that is a result of it. And it's an important result that we have to understand. So let's talk about the government style in North America. Both the United States and Canada, we have a republic. That's a rule by the people. If you always take off the re, you have public. Well, who's the public? It's the people, right? So we have a republic government in both the United States and Canada, and both countries have a federal system. And a federal system of government is when there's shared power between the national, state, and local authorities. So just like if we talk about the interstate road system, the interstate road system is a federal system project, but the state controls, our own interstate in North Dakota, let's say, but you could even have local authorities. So for instance, if you're in town on I-29 or I-94, I-94 gets closed down by the state because of bad weather. Well, the interstate can still be open in those town areas because local authorities will take care of travelers in those areas, just not beyond those city limits. So a federal system is when there's shared power between national, state, and local authorities. And the interstate road system is just one example. There's many examples of this federal system. In the United States, we have a representative democracy. That's when an elected leader is voted into office to represent the public. It happens by majority rule, and somebody is going to represent me and you and our ideas and what we want happening in the government. And if we don't like it, we have another opportunity in 2 years or 4 years or 6 years, whatever it happens to be, to elect somebody different. In our representative democracy in the United States, we have 3 branches of government. The first and oldest established one is the legislative branch. That's what we know as Congress. Congress makes the laws. Then we have the executive branch, that's the president. The president enforces the laws. And then we have the judicial branch, and that's the Supreme Court, and they interpret the law. In Canada, they have a constitutional monarchy. That's when the monarch shares power with elected leaders. And what I would definitely like you to remember is the constitutional part. The Constitution is what limits the power of the king or queen. That's what makes it different than monarchs before, is like we can see today in Canada, the king and queen, because of the king or queen, at this point is the King Charles, has actually very little authority because the Constitution grants very little power to the monarch. They have a parliament in Canada, in their constitutional monarchy. They have elected leaders, just like, our legislative branch kind of, elected leaders who carry out the legislative duties. And this is in conjunction with the executive branch, and that's the prime minister. Now, the interesting thing about parliament is the prime minister comes from parliament. They are elected or brought up, if you will, from parliament. So the prime minister is in parliament as well. And then finally, I want to talk about the free market economy, especially in the United States, but even in Canada as well. They have a capitalistic economy, although there's a little bit more socialist tendencies than we have, a little bit more, we have a little bit more free market economy in the United States. This is where private businesses can control and decide on what their business is, on their production, on their workers. There's some regulation, for instance, like there's child labor laws, or there's minimum wage laws, or there's regulations like you have to have safe working environments, and the government can say, no, we got to shut this down because this is not maybe handicap accessible, or different things like that. So there are regulations, but in general, private businesses can operate and make as much money as they want or produce whatever they want. It's important to know that Canada and the United States are #1 trading partners, which means we want to have a good trading relationship, and we don't want to jeopardize that because it could impact both of the economies of both the United States and Canada, and that could do a lot of damage to both economies. Okay, so that will be it for the test tomorrow. I hope you get this down and you are ready bright and early at 8 a.m. tomorrow. See you then.